So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight, on site and online, joining us from home for Unscripted, TAP Center for Creativity's free event series that brings our community together to explore the creativity that exists here in London's cultural life, featuring today's conversation with three of the artists in this extraordinary exhibition around us right now, Dollirium, including Anthony Veilleux, Jacqui Gallant, and Sarah Legault. To begin, however, I'd like to extend a very warm note of thanks to Sandra DeSalvo, to Sarah, and the wonderful team here at TAP for putting this together for us today, and for inviting me, and as well as Words and Public Humanities, to help bring Unscripted's event tonight. My name is Josh Lambier, and I'm the Director of the Public Humanities at Western University and the Artistic Director of Words, London's Literary and Creative Arts Festival here in the city. We're gathering today a few blocks away from the forks of Dashkanzibi, or Antler River, also known as the Thames River, on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapuak, and Chinookan peoples. In the London area, we are governed by several treaties. There were Treaty 6 London Township, the Treaty 7 Sombre Township, and Treaty 21 Longwoods. The land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and water, and as vital contributors to the artistic and cultural life of London and the entire region. We're grateful to all of you who responded to the call of the exhibition. And the call, and I'm going to quote it, "Come and witness the gallery's transformation into the island of misfit toys," which is a wonderful description for the exhibition. Each of the dolls and figures around us, as the exhibition description reminds us, is one-of-a-kind handmade figure created to share an idea or illustrate a story rather than be used as a child's toy. Each doll has, in other words, a life, and yet it's an uncanny kind of life. Just over 100 years ago, Sigmund Freud described uncanniness as an experience where something familiar, homely, or taken for granted suddenly becomes unfamiliar, or eerie, or terrifying. The uncanny, he says, and this is a quote from Freud, is that class of terrifying which leads back to something long known to us, once very familiar. And it works to blur the distinction between the imaginary and reality. Those of you who have an interest in psychoanalysis or Freud might know that the word uncanny in German is unheimlich. So heimlich means homely, and unheimlich is the unhomely. When I first walked through Dollirium on opening night, I couldn't help but note how the dolls and figures take us to this in-between space of strangeness within the familiar and the familiar within the strange. Freud associated the feeling of uncanniness with visual stimuli that blurred the boundaries between life and death, animate and inanimate, with a keen focus on dolls, automata, doubles, severed limbs, mirrors, ghosts, madness, and even the familiar setting of the home, or the skeleton in the closet of the home. The ambiguity of these subjects and the uncanny playfulness of misfit toys pulls us in to discover something that has remained secret and hidden, but has now come to light. To help us explore the stories, characters, and inner lives of Dollirium, and to hear more about the community of artists who created these works, I'm very pleased to welcome three of the feature artists in the exhibition tonight, all of whom are from London, Ontario. I'd like to introduce each of our artists with some brief biographical remarks. Sarah Legault is a music video director, filmmaker, producer, stop-motion animator, builder, and writer. Her first stop-motion animation, Dear Love, earned Best Animated Short Film Award at the 2014 Toronto Independent Film Festival. Since then, she has teamed up with Johnny Hollow to direct and animate their stop-motion video, Firefly, co-directed and animated a video for Billy Talent's Ghost Ship of Cannibal Rats, and directed and animated Iskway's Little Star, which earned her the 2020 Juno Award for Music Video of the Year, as well as the Stingray Music Rising Star Prize. Sarah has won awards for her unique custom motorcycle paintwork and has participated in over 50 group exhibits. Her work spans illustration to stop motion animation, directing, doll making, set building, painting, photography, design, and co-curation of the Shadowwood Collective, which I hope we'll hear a little bit more tonight. Alongside her partner, Jason Wojcik, Jacqui Gallant funneled her creativity into Jason's dream of opening a tattoo shop. In 1996, Addictive Tattoo opened its doors and holds the title of London's longest running tattoo street shop. Jacqui then, in her words, fell down the rabbit hole into the strange world of art doll making. As a maker and collector, she had a goal to host a space where doll artists could come together to learn, create, and exhibit their work. In 2011, Jacqui opened Dollirium Art Doll Emporium in London, Ontario. During Dollirium's short life, it was the world's only international art doll gallery and supported over 80 artists from 22 countries around the world. Though closed, Dollirium's legacy continues to live on, as the current show here affirms, and Jacqui continues her engagement with the art doll community. Anthony Veilleux is a graduate of London's beloved Beal Art program. Shortly after art school, he landed an apprenticeship at Blue Dragon Tattoo here in London, which allowed him to make a comfortable living designing and applying walking art on many wonderful clients. Anthony is the current owner of 227 Tattoo, and he also pursues freelance opportunities as a special effects makeup artist, painter, and sculptor in the film industry and beyond. I also discovered some very cool designs that you've made for toys and other models, etc. along the way. He has an impressive resume of film projects he has worked on, including John Fassette's Ginger Snaps, George Romero's Land of the Dead, Zack Snyder's 300, a few of the Resident Evil films, Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim, and Ari Aster's recent film, Beau is Afraid. Please join me extending a very warm welcome to Sarah, Jacqui, and Anthony. Okay, so I wanted to start off, and it makes sense to start off here to talk about the exhibition's title, Dollirium. The resurrection, too, which I hope we'll get into as well. Maybe we can start with Jacqui on this one. The title of the show resurrects, as it were, the foundational work that you did to create and operate Dollirium Art Doll Emporium. I wonder if you could take us back to talk about the genesis of the project. What was the spark to create Dollirium?
The spark to create it was that there wasn't anything like it. And I met Sarah by chance. I chased her down on the street, actually, because I heard that she was a doll maker. And then as I started to make them myself, I started to find more and more people that were relatively local that I could communicate with. And life circumstances put me in a spot where I had to make a change.
Right.
And that just made sense. So I just threw it all into the wind and opened Dollirium.
Right. When did you start making art dolls? Or as you said, when did you fall down the rabbit hole to start making?
I think it was early 2000s.
Okay.
My partner had bought me some polymer clay, and we went up to a cottage up north, and I started to play with the clay, and I made these funny little characters. And it was at that moment that I realized that art didn't have to be beautiful to be art. It just had to stir some kind of emotion. And it made me laugh. So I just went down the rabbit hole. And for some reason, I thought that I was the only one in the world that was doing this.
Right.
And then I found out I wasn't. And that
How did you find it?
just online,
Right.
you know, it was eBay actually. I Googled, I don't know, whatever I put in the search, dolls, I guess, and found other people that made one-of-a-kind dolls.
Right.
And it just spiraled from there. It just became an obsession.
Right.
Like a complete obsession.
Now, when you say obsession, tease that out. What?
Oh, like you'd be sculpting something and then it's light out in the morning. And
Wow.
it just really took me over. Everything I saw suddenly looked different. There was inspiration everywhere I looked.
Right.
And it just...
You were traveling to conferences as well, though.
Yeah, I went to some of the art doll conferences. I went to one in California.
Right.
Yeah, it literally consumed me. Like I was obsessed with.
When I was looking, doing some research for today's conversation, I found an interview that you did with the Beat magazine when Dollirium was going on, and there's a quotation that they pulled from you that I thought was great. I'm going to quote you here. People are fascinated and intrigued by the dolls. Only 1% of people are creeped out. So it's a good ratio.
But when they are creeped out, though, they're really
Really?
creeped out. They're really creeped out. And it's the eyes for most of them.
Right.
When they look into the eyes, it creeps them out. They can't.
How did Londoners respond to?
It was an amazing response.
Right. Where was it too in London?
It was actually behind where Anthony's tattoo shop is now. So he's on Clifton Vale and Warrencliffe. We were literally in their parking lot behind them.
Right.
So it was just off of Warrencliffe.
Okay.
Right.
So if I understand correctly, Sarah, you helped to manage Dollirium while it was operating. And right from the start of the project, as we found out, running down the road to catch Sarah.
Literally leaving this venue, ironically.
Yeah.
With art dolls in your hand.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about how you were involved in the gallery and what your role was when it started?
So Jacqui approached me about this idea, and it sounded really wild, and it sounded like a fantasy gallery to open. And I remember there was other doll makers that were coming to help, and you had this connection already with people in North America that you were telling me about. Then we found out everyone just started coming out of the woodworks. Like we found this amazing creator that lived across the street. Her wife was a carpenter, and so they were very big on helping us with setups. Yeah. They built shadow boxes for us so we could photograph everything coming in. And we had a small panel of people that would go through all the submissions. It started getting overwhelming after a while. A lot of locals, Ontario-based, but then North American-based, and then very quickly getting flooded internationally because it's such a close-knit community that once word got out that there was a gallery that was showing strictly art dolls, we found out it sounded like there wasn't any other gallery that was doing this. So it just became easy to find everybody. And on social media, if someone tried to add me as a friend and they lived in another country, we would have 27 or 127 mutual friends. And they were all the same art doll makers that we followed and appreciated.
It was like wildfire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were doing programming. I read somewhere, I don't know if this just to kind of whether this is true, but every 8 weeks you would have a new
5 weeks. Yeah, it was. We didn't know what we were doing.
We had so many shows.
Wow.
So
that
many
means that there was
shows.
enough people who wanted to show their work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That you were the spot. You were the beacon.
Yeah.
Collecting the bat signal for all the other
It was
dark
amazing.
artists.
I feel like we would have close to 21 artists per show as well.
Yeah.
Quite not all the time, but it started turning into that way.
Yeah, pretty close.
And we would do workshops. Somebody approached us about doing a reality TV show after the first or second year, and we said no. We're all reclusive. Our anxiety's too high. We can't do this.
That would have been a great show.
No one would have talked.
Can you recall, now your art practice is really interdisciplinary, so you work across a lot of mediums, but doll making seems to be really core, and it moves across those genres. Can you recall when you first started making dolls?
Yes, it was a high school project that was called the Star Wars Project.
Wow.
And they gave us Super Sculpey, and we had to build a character with a diorama. And so I built this guy he was like stuck in a giant hand, and he looked like a demon with an eyeball in his mouth. And I thought it was funny, but I didn't cook him right, and so he kept falling apart over time. And then I moved to London, Ontario, and somebody asked me to take part in an art show. And it was the first time I've ever been asked to take part in an art show because I'm from a smaller community in Kincardine where everyone painted sunsets. And if you did anything creepy, you were out of there. So I actually moved to London. I keep using the term I found my misfits here because I found the alternative scene here. And so the misfits keeps being something that gets reintroduced. And we even had a show called The Island of Misfit Dolls for Christmas. So that's why
Amazing.
it makes sense to bring back the misfits again. So somebody said, can you take part in this art show? I'm like, I don't know what to do. So I still had Super Sculpey left over. I made this court jester with razor sharp teeth and put his head on doweling, and his head just like turned like this anytime you would touch him. And everyone said they were terrified of him. And I'm like, oh, great, I'll make more. And then the show I was doing here was like 2005. And yeah, the show ended. I lived a few doors down. Jackie's tattoo shop was also a few doors down. And I had the dolls in my hand. And that's when she
I saw her
stopped
from
me on
the
street.
balcony. I literally ran out of my shop and chased her down the street. It's like, oh my God, you make dolls.
I was scared. I was like, I don't know who you are. She's like, come up to my studio and we'll have an art day. And I'm like, I can hardly
know,
leave
you're
my house. I
weird.
don't know if I can knock on your door, but then there we were.
Yeah, no, I'm a complete extrovert.
which is good.
That's the best Island of Misfit Toys meet cute ever. Finding toys in the street. Anthony, you have been a longtime collaborator and comrade of Sarah and Jacqui.
Yes.
If I can phrase it that way. Were you involved in the pre-resurrected Dollirium, and how did you get involved with the Dollirium?
For one, they were next door,
Yes.
so I worked there. So I'd heard the rumblings, and
Carpentry.
again, knowing, I knew Jacqui before, just for fun, I drew Jackie's first tattoo.
He did. True
I
story.
didn't do it, but I drew it.
Yeah,
I
true
was
story.
like, who is this girl? Okay, we'll try this out. So the connection's always been there, right? And with Sarah as well, as she said, the alternative scene and working fashion shows and stuff like that back in the old days. So there was that connection. There's always that connection. I've been sculpting forever. Literally, I can't think of a time as a kid that I wasn't making something. My mom made those porcelain dolls that you'd go to the ceramic place and they'd sew you the head and the hands, and you'd fire them. She'd glaze them. She'd build bodies for them. I was fascinated by the heads and the hands. So I kept making those. I never really made dolls, which was kind of interesting when I think back to that. I never really made a doll from foot up kind of thing, but I made the feet, I made the legs, I made the torsos, but it never came together. So when I heard that that's what was going on, I thought I'm probably not part of that crew, but again, the welcoming nature of,
Right.
yeah, but you make these figures and these characters and this, this sort of living, breathing little thing
Yeah.
from nothing I was welcomed. So that was wonderful, just to be able to be a part of that. And then of course, the technical side, because I've done it forever and spent ridiculous amounts of my own allowance and part-time jobs. And, I felt that I could help people who didn't have to spend their own money, and I could be like, okay, try it this way. And you won't have so many broken pieces. Try it this way. If you need to make a mold, you can make small mold. And that, I think, helped ingratiate me with people that were like,
Yeah.
oh my God, that makes so much sense. And it was like, well, yeah, because I did the trial and error for you,
Yeah.
And that end of it, I'm much more interested in the technical craftsman part of what I do. So, I'm always in a way, like I really admire the narrative. I admire the character. I can create, something that looks real, but I don't have the story behind it.
Right.
So that part of it's really interesting. So when I went to the first doll shows, I was just floored seeing all these characters, but everything had so much depth to it, I guess. I was concerned with depth of the materials and using the different materials, like Jacqui had said about the eyes. It's like when I finally could make my own eyes that looked real, that was a big milestone. And then, every stepping stone from that was another technical challenge.
Right.
But it was really like that admiration for the people who had a story. I used to joke that in art school, it was like, I was never the troubled artist. I'd have friends who, mental health issues, drug and alcohol issues, but were great artists. Whereas I was like a pretty good artist without the issues.
Right.
So it was like, that was a better place for me to live kind of thing, right? So I can continue, whereas some of those have fallen hard. But yeah, it's that difference between just enjoying the challenge of, I want to take an idea and make something that somebody can look at and imbue their own story to,
Right.
because I don't have the story.
It's amazing. Well, I think we're going to come back to that as well in terms of stories, and also that technical aspect that you're describing. And you mentioned that you were a graduate of our beloved art program. But I did find something before that, and I want to see if this is something I just found as a fiction on the internet or whether this is true. I found a story that your interest in makeup effects goes back quite far. I heard that you had the chance to meet the Academy Award-winning makeup artist Stéphane Dupuis
Yes.
when you were a teenager.
Yes.
Could
Yeah,
you,
that's
could
a
you tell
deal.
us
Yeah.
this story?
So Stéphane Dupuis at the time was in Montreal. I'm a Montreal kid, so that's where I came from. I moved to London when I was about 17, I think. So I've been here longer than anywhere else, basically, and this is where I live, kind of thing. But as a kid in Montreal, involved in like the punk rock scene, and there was a lot of very interesting artist types. And a friend of mine had done a short film, and he said this guy had made the vampire teeth for the film, and this was his name. And I was like, hang on, that name is like, he worked on Quest for Fire, he worked on Scanners, and this is going back to the 80s.
Cronenberg, yeah.
And yeah, a lot of Cronenberg's early stuff. And I'm like, what do you mean he lives in Montreal? Like, oh my goodness. And a friend of mine knew and had a little fanzine at the time, which was, what would a fanzine equivalent be now? I guess would be a blog, right? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, so the fanzines of those days were just artists and writers and photographers, and, you know, you'd put together a little magazine, bring it to the corner store or the corner weird shop, and they'd sell them. So yeah, I had a chance to meet him, and it was just, you know, going to this guy's studio and seeing bits and bobs and artifacts from Quest for Fire and Happy Birthday to Me and Terror Train, some of those wonderful, horrible Canadian horror films of that era. And he had all this stuff in his studio, and it was, I think I would have been 15, maybe 14, 15. And that was like, wow. Like,
Well, and
this
it's seeing an artist that does
Yeah.
the thing that goes onto the screen. It becomes almost something you can feel and touch and meet somebody
Yeah.
who does this thing.
Yeah, and the big thing is like, and what you had said earlier about, you know, this multimedia concept, where it was like, it takes a sketch to a sculpture, to making molds, to producing it in another material, to doing a finish, to presenting it. And that was something I didn't have a focus. I wasn't a painter. I wasn't, you know what I mean? I wasn't just going to work with clay or stone as a sculptor. So it was this medium of special makeup effects was the only thing I could think of that took all those disciplines to get there, right? To get to that finished piece. And I think most people from my era, we share a lot of the same stories. Every time I'm in an effect shop, it's like, oh yeah, you know, ruined carpets with latex, and, you know, my stole my mom's makeup, and just all that stuff that we did, you know, paper mache and working with all these different materials, because you did, like I said, you didn't have that focus of, here is a canvas, here is oil paint.
Yeah.
And that's it. And you're going to explore the concepts, but with those tools. Whereas with the sculptures, it's like, I think I mentioned that to you earlier too, the idea of sometimes it's a found object that inspires everything. You know, you find an odd thing on the street, a piece of metal, and you're like, that looks really cool. That would make a great hat.
Yeah.
So now you have a character, and that's their hat.
Yeah.
You know, and that's such a wonderful thing. And just to continue that thread, when I got to work on 300 in Montreal, Stéphane Dupuis was on the crew.
Oh, wow.
And that was amazing for me
circle, yeah.
because I'm like, hang on a second. Like, I met you when I was like 14, 15. I think 300 was 2006 or something like that. So I was older. And to meet him and be able to share, like, I met you at this period. He had little to no recollection, which, you know, it's
Of
like,
course.
okay, it wasn't a bad thing, but in his case, it's like, you know,
That he felt so heartwarming
yeah.
that you remembered.
Yeah, and he would draw really great. He wanted to work for Disney at one point. He'd draw these wonderful caricatures of everybody, and they were scathing. Like, they were scathing caricatures, and he would rip you to shreds in these cartoons, and everybody wanted to have a cartoon done of them by Stéphane. And he drew one of me, and it was horribly unflattering, a Batman costume for some reason, I don't know. So I drew one of him, and it was, I called him the Cartooninator. And it was like, beware the Cartooninator. It was a nice drawing of Stéphane. And he told me at the time, he's like, no one's ever drawn me. And I was like, oh, well, is that a good thing? And he's like, yeah. Pinned it up on his makeup mirror for the show. And I was like, ah. And everybody else would look at it and be like, oh, somebody finally drew Stéphane. You know, I couldn't be as scathing because I just had too much respect for the guy. But yeah, so that
That's
was really
amazing.
nice.
Well, I'm glad that the story
Yeah.
is true. This
Yeah.
is a real.
Yeah.
I've solved it for me, but
Yeah,
that's amazing.
no, that's interesting.
We still have sometimes, this is one of the things I find so compelling about this project, we still do have this idea that artists have that romantic sensibility of working in solitude, the solitary genius. But one of the things that I find so compelling about Dollirium is the fact that it's so focused on community and community building here in London and beyond, in Canada and internationally. And maybe I can start this question with you, Jacqui. What inspired your community-based approach as a community builder for Dollirium and doll making practice?
I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. What inspired it was just
Would there be a
so many.
connection with the tattoo community too? That's
I mean,
something
it's
that
sort
you
of
came
an
up in?
odd. The people tend to be attracted to more odd objects.
Yeah, yeah.
What was the question?
Yeah,
I'm
well,
sorry.
and I'm thinking too, and you've already started to unfold some of these pieces in terms of finding people online and people gravitating towards it.
Well, and I think because each of the dolls, like each of the doll makers, they're so different, even though it's the same,
Yeah.
it's so different that you want to find as many of them as possible.
It gives you that feeling of being a kid again and playing in a sandbox with other kids.
Exactly. I mean, you're all creating, but it's different.
Right.
So it just,
But I saw too that I was looking at, I think there was a blog that you did, Odd Dolls, and there's all these mentions of things like swaps and events. Can you tell us about swaps and how these work?
I meant to bring that traveling, actually. I belong to a few online doll making groups in the early part of my finding this. And they inspire ideas to do your dolls. So there was one called Mrs. Blatherby's Orphanage for the Unsound and Unattractive, or something like that.
Right.
So this orphanage, all these dolls that we made lived in this orphanage. And so they all had to have stories and all that. But that was one of the blogs that I did was from Odd Dolls. That was what I called my dolls, were Odd Dolls.
Right. And I think there was a Shakespeare one, and I wondered whether
Oh,
the piece over
that's
here
him.
was
Yeah.
inspired by that swap. Is that,
Yeah, that's him. It was a Shakespeare
wow. So that-
challenge.
right. So
it was a
that
Shakespeare
worked out of
challenge.
a kind of a community
It
challenge.
did,
to
yeah,
produce
an
the work.
online. I forgot about that part.
You should talk about the traveling doll.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
traveling doll was a really amazing project, and I've done 3 of them, participated in them. So in this group that I belong to, we would all start a doll. So her armature and the head. And then it would get mailed to another artist in another country or, I think the projects were about 3 months long maybe, and we had each doll we had for 2 weeks. So the doll would travel. 6 of us would send our doll around. So we would all work on each of these dolls, and then we would receive our doll back finished with a journal of its story.
Wow.
So that was really amazing.
And you did 3 of these.
I did 3 of them, yeah. I was going to bring one tonight and I forgot.
Right. And such a community practice. And you can start to see how so many people would have found Dollirium because of these projects that you were finding people and working with them and having
Yeah.
meaningful engagement with.
Most of the artists that we started with, I met them through these online groups that I belong to.
Are any of them in the show?
Yes, Camila, Wooded Woods was in the orphanage group. Those were really good dolls. That group was really, really good.
Probably Coop Teflon. You knew her for a while.
Kook was in it. I think that's probably it. But we did show quite a few of those artists at the gallery. Mealy Monster,
Yep. Beth Robinson.
Beth Robinson.
Who's behind us.
Yeah, there was quite a few that I met
That's
from there
amazing.
that
I mean,
started.
it's just such a compelling way to engage with other people, to find other people who have a like-minded interest in the dark arts and engage with them. It's such a fascinating thing. I'm going to link here to Sarah. I was also struck by another collaborative project with crossover connections to Dollirium. I mentioned it in your biography, the Shadowwood Collective, which you co-curate. Could you tell us about Shadowwood and how that project came together? The lineup of people who participate in it, like the lineup for this exhibition here, is so impressive. And tell us more about this project.
Well, we were just a bunch of kids that were getting together. Like none of us really had major accolades at that time, and it was 2005. We started it. Like I had a friend that had a motorcycle who would paint it every year, and one year he painted it white, and I said, "Well, you should just let me paint it next year, and I'll put it in a show," which we did here at TAP Center for Creativity. So this is my connection originally to this space and artists was we would rent this space. We would get a bunch of alternative artists. Anthony was in the group as well, is in the group. Melissa Panth, who's showcasing here, is with the Shadowwood. I know Sarah Deck is with the Shadowwood. Tom Taggart is with the Shadowwood. And so we would do these shows, I think 2005, 2006, 2008, 2011, 2016, and 2018. And it was multidisciplinary. We had performers, musicians, visual artists, models, fashion designers, but we just wanted it to be this experience where everyone would walk away from the audience experiencing something different and unusual. And it was a very
hanging from hooks.
We had people doing body suspension in the middle of the gallery.
That caused quite a lot of people to be like, "Wow,
Yeah.
I've never seen this."
But it was that idea of like community and people feeling like they could understand each other with the work that they liked or work that they admired, and that just kept bringing us together, and it allowed for a lot of collaborations later on too. But and a lot of those artists in the group are just artists now. They don't have day jobs. They did really well in their careers, and it was just because we had to keep creating, and we were inspired by each other, and we learned from each other, and over the decades, that's still something important I recognize, and we want to keep teaching that to new generations of people, that it's better to work together. You can learn, you can get to where you need to go, as long as you're surrounding yourself around people that you're feeling inspired by as well.
Yeah, because the support structure, like you had said, there's a lot of artists that work very insulated and isolated, and the troubles kind of multiply. Whereas when you have that support group, you're like, have you dealt? Oh yes. Okay. What did you do? What did you do? Mm-hmm. We have sort of informal sculpture nights where we just meet together, groups of 4 or 5, and we bring stuff that we're working on, and we chat, and we have tea, and we eat food, and it's, it's there's not sort of a goal. It's not goal oriented. I think with a lot of the community part of it. Obviously, when there's a show, you have a goal in mind, but just to do this all the time, because you can't really think of another thing that you would want to do, but then finding the like-minded people and seeing that there is that support there for each other, and and with the Shadowwood shows, we ended up with getting the support of some of the members of Rue Morgue magazine, which was a horror magazine out of Toronto. That connected us to having Clyde Barker show original pieces in this space, and you sort of try to find that lineage, and you're like Liverpool, theater, film, LA, London, Ontario, back wall at the Tap. You're like, that's incredible.
And then Anita Kuntz joined afterwards as well.
Yes.
Who did a show here last year.
Fabulous show. Yeah.
Way in which artists stay connected, and
and
it was a gorgeous show
Yeah.
here.
It was.
Yeah, and that does actually lead to the question of how TAP became the home of Shadowwood, and TAP is such a community-oriented space. It makes sense, but was that why this became kind of the home?
No other gallery in town would have touched us.
Right. Oh, there's that.
Yeah. Because when you're having an art show, one of the first concerns is age, appropriate, and insurance. You're like,
If you're hanging people
if we're
from-
having artists who suspend themselves from hooks, and we're having models that are, shall we say, risque, then it's like, you have to kind of consider that. And for some reason, the TAP was like, oh, okay.
They were very welcoming.
And to be honest, I mean, after the sheer numbers of people that would come to those group shows, I think any gallery would be happy to sort of go, that's some really good numbers. That's a lot of traffic that's come in and out of this place.
We had 300 people showing up to the openings while paying entry to get in.
Yeah. Those are fantastic. And again, it's this idea of these group shows means every one of these artists has an audience that they bring to the show. So I love being part of a group show. I've had solo shows in the past, and it's like, they're fun. They're very family. And, you're kind of like, yep, I know all of you. We're going out for dinner after. Whereas, to be exposed to people that have never seen your work before, don't know who the hell you are, and showing up in a space like this, even for myself, there was artists that I'm like, oh, I've never seen this person before. How did I, I've been involved with these groups forever. How do I not know who that is? Or how do I not know who this is? And it's that discovery you can't get it, when you go to a smaller gallery that has one artist. You're either interested in that artist or you aren't. Yeah. And if you aren't, you're not going in.
Right. I heard that this is a question to kind of dovetail into this mentorship component that seems to be coming up in terms of the description of helping other artists and the way that you were telling the group how to prepare materials in a certain way. And it kind of runs through, but I heard that you were, when Dollirium was no longer available, we're doing sculpting jams with Sarah.
At my house,
Could you
at my kitchen table.
What was a sculpting jam? What would that look like?
Well, that started obviously with you, because it was your space.
Yes. So ever since I moved to London, I moved to Wortley Village, and I had this amazing mentor that lived next door to me, and she taught me a lot about community and working together. So we started hosting these painting parties on the front lawn, and all the neighbors thought it was weird and asked us what we're doing when they would walk by. My landlady loved it, and she took part in it sometimes, and that just grew. And so it was the idea of the outdoor painting party, but everyone who had kids and got married and didn't come out anymore, we then started the sculpting jam instead.
And the sculpting jam was never dependent on weather, so that helped. It's like, we can do it inside, and and it was really just, okay, I'm always working on something. So it's like, this is what I'm working on now, I'll bring it. And then questions, and, oh, you're working on this, oh, that's really cool, I just discovered this new thing and that new thing. And so you get a group, like I said, it went anywhere from just Sarah and I to, 5 or 6 people filling up the whole table. And we got a bunch of the digital artists involved.
A lot of video games.
Really cool, to get for the Luddites and the digital world to meet. It's really fun. And it was a great feeling, it was just kind of like, okay. And I always enjoyed sharing. And I mean, Sarah always likes to credit me for just teaching her stuff. And I'm like, I'm just telling you how I made it, right? That's not my goal. It's more just, that's the byproduct of sharing, is we all get to learn. So I get to learn from her and, helping her with her stop motion stuff. And it's like, well, I have this thing I need to make. And I'm like, all right, I'll see what I can do. So I made a porthole and made a mold of the porthole and made her small portholes, and just that kind of fun, having a part of it, and not, a lot of what we do, I think there's not as much ego with our group in particular. Of course, we're all proud of what we do, but it's much more fun to share it than it is to sort of lord it over somebody and be like, well, guess what I made that you're never going to get anywhere close to, because
I'm not going to tell you.
Because I'm not going to tell you, But it's more fun when you discover something on your own because it's a challenge or a problem, and then you get to share it with somebody. Then they're inspired. They get to make it. It feeds itself.
Yeah,
right?
it just keeps rolling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and everybody improves, and that's how you develop a scene too. People who want to work together and want to move to London and live an artistic life here, which is what we need. Everybody to be here.
Well, it was
everybody at home from everywhere else.
That's right.
London.
It was easy to recruit talent for projects that we got hired for down the road too, because then we already knew how each other worked and how we got along when we were working, and abilities some people had that others didn't have, and that a lot of the projects I've been working on are people from the Shadowwood Collective helping, or people that we meet through them that they teach and mentor themselves, and so I guess there's a personal motive also in there as well.
That's essential too. Can we look forward to a resurrection of the Shadowwood coming at some point?
Shadowwood, yeah. The only reason we stopped was the pandemic. That was
Yeah.
it.
The
So
only reason
Yeah.
which stopped everything.
Everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty lame reason.
Yeah, I know.
The exhibition really shines a light on the place of storytelling and character development in the creation of our dolls and the figures. And I'd like to ask you all to see if whatever you feel comfortable sharing, to talk about some of the creations. And I chose some that are at the front of the room. And it actually just turns out that it's a great, in everybody's eye line. And Greg, who's our cameraman, can, for people at home, will have a chance to put the camera on the works. And I'll maybe ask Jacqui first, because the work I'd maybe get a story from is the poster girl for Dollirium, Sloan, over here. Could you tell us a story about Sloan, how you made her, what the creative spark was, anything you would like to share, could share for us?
Well, I'm not just a doll maker. I do a lot of other things.
Yep.
And she started out as a commission piece that I went way past the deadline on. So I had to sell her another doll that was already finished. But Sloan sat on my table and kept looking at me and wanted to be completed. So
So for everybody here, just the piece right here on the wall. Yeah, sorry.
I knew that she was going to be a sloth doll,
Right.
but she did start out as a commission that never got delivered.
I think it's called Sloth Girl, when there's an Instagram piece of you constructing it, I think.
Yeah. So that was a commission piece that,
Does that
But she-
speak of the taste of the milk?
it doesn't, but I mean, she's,
Sloth-like pace?
I don't know what inspired her to be a sloth. I think probably an Instagram video of a cute sloth. But I loved their fingernails. And a lot of my dolls do have either really sharp teeth or pointed things, and I liked the nails. So that's how she came to be.
And how long did it take you to make it?
Well, technically,
You're off the hook because the other one replaced the commission.
yeah, and she loves her dolls. So she was on the table for over a year.
Wow.
But she probably has about 20 to 30 hours
Oh, okay.
in her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you start, do you have in your mind's eye an image of what she's going to look like, or does she evolve as you make her?
Sometimes there's a vague image. But almost always for me anyway, they develop on their own.
Right.
So I put the eyes in first a lot.
And very expressive eyes that she has.
The eyes usually go in first. And then I just sculpt and she comes out.
What's she made
So-
of? What's the
It's
material?
polymer clay. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, she is a perfect cover girl for the show.
Thank you. I'm quite fond of her. Like, I really fell in love with her when I was working on her.
Right. And and might be a question, but did you know that she was going to be the front of the poster for the show?
No, I didn't know Sarah chose her.
Yeah. And do you have any thoughts on why that was the one that you thought,
we went down to see which pieces we had in the prior Dollirium collection. And I was really excited to see that Jacqui had a workspace set up where she had her little doll studio again. Yeah. And I didn't want to imagine Jacqui never creating again. And that was the piece that was sitting on the table. And I was like, what is this? I'm really happy to see you're working again. And she said, oh, this is Sloth Doll. Like she has her little sloth nails. You think I'm going to paint them red? And I was like, well, you have a week to finish it because we need a poster.
Yeah, so the pressure was on. Yeah.
that's while deadlines do that.
She got glasses instead of eyelashes.
I love the glasses.
I did too. It changed everything about her. When she put her little glasses on, she was like, oh my God, she's so cute now.
That's amazing. That's so good. And Sarah, one of the works that greets us when we come into the show is this piece here, I'm kind of instructing it, Housing Crisis Behind Me. Could you tell us a bit about this piece? Because
Yep.
again, it's right in our, it's a perfect spot to to gather everybody's attention?
So during the pandemic, I did have to move out of the house I was in for 13 years, and I had to move, and then I moved to Toronto because I was working down there at the same time. But it was the first place that ever felt like home to me, and it was hard for me to let go of the house. So a lot of a lot of my pieces, I usually create around events that are happening in my life. So it's the old house I lived in for 13 years on his head.
That's amazing. And there's the two pieces here at the end. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yes. So Plague Doll actually has my hair, so I feel weird ever selling her because I feel like it's a voodoo doll. That is my hair, yes.
She's a voodoo.
And the Day of the Dead piece, I always loved the Day of the Dead dolls that everybody made, and I have a fascination with skeletons, and so that was my first time trying to take more time in the sculpting process. And I remember we did that at the Dollirium table when we were all doll jamming together.
Yeah, that was fun.
And how long would a piece like that take? I imagine everything's individual, but how long would it take to?
A piece could take me about a week.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yep.
That's stunning. When you work on, say, a stop motion animation project, I imagine when, say, for example, you're working with Iskway, which you can see 41 of the dolls from Little Star are on display here, and I highly recommend everybody go and look. I imagine it changes the process. When you work with somebody, do they say, I want to see the whole time? Do you say, I'm going to come up with them? And then how does that kind of process change things when you're working with somebody?
Well, it's funny because that's the first time I had to make dolls that were not creepy. So I was trying really hard to make sure that, there was one goth kid, but the rest of them are relatively normal looking. I would make sure, we had a lot of meetings ahead of time. If I'm working with a band, I really try to listen to the song a lot and talk with the artists a lot so I can get an idea of the story they're trying to tell. So when, for an example, when I was working with Iskway, her main request was that there was an army of children. And so once we realized what song we were working on, and it was related to the Colton Boushie and Tina Fontaine murders and how the media was victim blaming Tina and Colton, we wanted to build all the sets out of the newspaper articles that were released, and just really trying to move along that type of, just really trying to be respectful for the stories that the artists are trying to share.
Yeah. Did Iskway see the dolls in construction, or did she see them on a big reveal and here they are?
So every night when you're doing stop motion animation, you work an 8-hour day, you get 10 seconds of footage.
Yeah.
So I would upload it, and I would send the band the link every night, or if they wanted to see the whole process as we went along. The build itself was 5 months. And then it was about 5 weeks of filming. So it took us about 6 months in total to complete that project with 11 people. Yeah.
And a gorgeous video. Has everybody seen
It is incredible.
Little Star?
Yeah.
Just such a beautiful, beautiful
Yeah.
video. And one during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? Because I think it was shortly into it.
Yeah. So the pandemic was just weird because I was working with Iskway doing set design for some of her shows, and then we were set to do it at Stanford University and Luminato and the Juno Awards broadcast stages, but it was so weird for me to go from working on miniature sets all the time to try to then work on large scale. My comfort is miniature, hiding in my room in the dark. So, so I did get a few requests from production companies because nobody could work anymore. So in order for bands to do music videos, they had to find people that could create at home. And fortunately, that's where my comfort zone is.
Yeah.
But the projects didn't go through. But then shortly after, I got recruited by Stupid Buddy Studios to work on a project for AMC called Ultra City Smiths. And turned out Tom Waits was the narrator for the project. And they had a A-list celebrity cast. Wow. And they gave me a week to get down there, and we actually built the 35-stage studio together, and then I was doing all the practical lighting for 35 stages, working in between an amazing cinematographer named Joe Passarelli, and then yeah, I just got to work with more misfits down there.
That's amazing. That's amazing. This is maybe an unfairly large question, but how long were you making dolls before you started to think, oh, I can make stop motion out of these?
So even though we were running Dollirium, we were doll makers at every show in Dollirium as well. And, you know, you get inspired by what other people are doing. Some have them posed, some people are putting wires in them. So I slowly started building them into stop motion characters where they had wires, but they didn't have hands or feet at that time. And at least they could bend a little bit, but I didn't understand how those structures really worked. And then I went to the Quay Brothers exhibit at the MoMA in New York, and it was my rabbit hole. Because then I could see all these beautiful films that I watched for years that I thought were polished. I could see it was like popsicle sticks and glue on the back, and it looked horrible, and like balls of tape and forced perspective rooms. So I'm like, okay, I think I can do this. And
you taught yourself to do it.
Yeah, I had encouragement from my friend Timothy Glasgow. He said I could do it. And then another friend, Danielle DiPicciotto, who lives in Germany. She's the co-founder of the Love Parade in Berlin, invited me to do a show in Germany with her and a couple of her friends. And at that time, I was doing 2D animation work, and we were doing music videos and background projections. I was animating her illustrations under her direction. And it was really interesting because we got to do projects for Mute Records, which was like a dream for me. And then we got to go to the Detroit Institute of Art, and we could see the work we were doing in the museum, which, knowing like Frida Kahlo stuff, is on the other side of the wall. And then I just said, Danielle came with me actually to the MoMA exhibit, and I said, I know you're expecting 2D animations from me for the show, but would you be okay if I tried stop motion animation for the first time? And she said, sure. So I took 8 months, did my first film. We literally pressed the button on the computer, took the USB cable out, and I went on a plane to Germany. Oh, wow. So like it was literally finished edit, go to the airport, and that's how I got into stop motion.
So, I mean, that's a story of courage. It's like, find your rabbit hole. Is that the message?
Read Alice in Wonderland.
So amazing. So, Anthony,
Yes.
when you walk through the exhibition, and this is for Sightline, for folks at home, there's two here. One's untitled, number 3, and
Yes.
then the other is Disney Mori.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the creation process for these two?
Those are quite fun. The untitled was really just I finished the piece. I think that was the only piece that wasn't finished when the show was announced. So I had to be like, I need to finish this. And
So you had the deadline.
Yes, exactly.
Jacqui.
I had a lot of other pieces done because I'm always working on something, but that was the one piece I kind of wanted in the show, but it wasn't quite finished. So I just had to. I have a nice wood shop at the house, and I could build my own bases and things. So it's kind of fun to be able to do the full completion of the piece. But both of those pieces started as original clay sculptures. So they were a polymer clay. If you're curious, the brand name is usually called Super Sculpey. So that's what most of us use. There's Legault and a few other brand names, but Super Sculpey is kind of our bread and butter for what we make everything out of.
That's great.
So we make them first, and then so that the heart with the mouth and the hands started as a heart. And I just wanted to make a realistic heart, because that was the challenge. How do I make a realistic heart? Get out all your manuals and see if I can replicate that look.
So anatomical.
Yeah, right. The hands were made as separate hands for a figure that never got completed, because I only tend to make the hands, the head, and the feet, and never make the body.
The dolls
Yes.
with your mom.
Yeah. So the hands were there. They were just a study of realistic human hands in a casual position, and then playing and looking at them and being like, hey, what if the hands grabbing, so the heart grabs what the heart wants, kind of idea. And then having the mouth actually came from, there's another sculpture back there, the gold goddess, the sort of golden skull with the female form. The lips from that became the lips on that, because I mold my pieces. So there's a silicone mold pretty much for everything that is in the show. There's only a few sort of one-of-a-kinds, and like the creepy sort of rhino beetle at the front is just, that's it. It doesn't exist other than that. So I have a silicone mold, so I can pour into it and pull out parts of it or pieces of it, and then I can join them together. And so there's a lot of that. Like, again, the technical love that I have for from this process to this process to that process gets me something that in the end, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I could never have started that with that intention.
Right, so you don't have that image in the mind's
No,
eye.
exactly.
It grows in the
Yeah,
process.
it's the excitement of having, like with Jacqui, you've got this work table and you've got stuff on it that's like a year old, stuff that's 6 months, and then all of a sudden you take the 6-month piece and you stick it on the you're like, oh, that works. Cool. And then that
Yeah.
helps you continue it. So both of those pieces come from, the skull of the other one was literally, again, it was just the challenge of making a realistic skull at that scale. And it's sort of a geriatric skull, so that's the challenge. It's like how you make the jawbone thinner and the way the teeth are. So that's what goes on in my head. It's never just I'm making a skull. It's like, well, it's male, female, it's Asian, it's African, it's Caucasian. There's all those things that I can research and get into the nitty gritty of. Then, of course, the Mickey Mouse part is just the humor of, Disney and death is one of those things that I find just a really neat combination, right? That you don't think of right away, but yeah, why wouldn't it be, right? So if Mickey had a skull, that was kind of Mickey's skull. Yeah, so that was where that came from. The treatment of those is fun because there was a paint called Vanta Black. There was an artist named Anish Kapoor, and it's kind of a fun story because Anish Kapoor is this very wealthy artist who designed this paint with some scientists called Vanta Black, and it's the blackest black. Wow. It's a black paint that you can treat a surface with, which absorbs something like 90% of the light that you would put on it. So it almost makes it invisible. It's a really interesting material, but he patented it. So no other artist in the world could use that paint. So he's pretty much a prick. So all these other artists have been like, why would you do this? Like, why would you invent this amazing thing and none of us can use it? So there's another fellow, damn, his name escapes me at the moment, but he decided to create his own. So he created a paint that's called Black 3.0, and it's almost as black as the Vanta Black. And the point of it is, again, that you paint your object with it and it absorbs more light. In this space, obviously, with the way things are lit, they show up more. But like the ball in particular of the Mickey Mouse piece, when you look at it, there's something almost suede about it. It doesn't have a gloss. It has a really interesting way that it plays with light. So that was kind of fun for me to create the hands and the heart and to use that paint to kind of be more focused on the silhouette of it than the detail. And it's only when you get closer, which is what so much of this work is, right? When you work miniature, you're literally inviting your audience to get this close to it. When you see an epic painting, you're supposed to be on that side of the room looking at, this epic painting. If you look close, you're like, oh, this looks really weird. You can see every brushstroke and cracks. And so our work, mine in particular, I want an audience to come up really close and sort of start to notice all the fun little things that I had fun creating. I mean, the hands, again, they have veins and there's wrinkles and there's fingernail marks and so on. But I like the fact that in the black, it's this silhouette that just kind of makes you wonder what the hell it is. Yeah. And hopefully I think that's the same with most of us. It's like what the hell is that?
Yeah.
Is the invite, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just like, oh, I know what that is.
That's amazing.
I mean, Melissa's piece in the front is so wonderful because, from the door, you're like, oh, it's a kitty cat. And then you're, holy jumping Jesus, what's going on there, right? What isn't going on with that piece? And that's the fun of it. Yeah. I've been really blessed having sort of a full-time job that does well, and working in film also does well. So when I make this stuff, I want to show it off, but it's never an intent, right? It's always just, what if I did this and this? And it satisfies me, and I hope that when other people look at it, there's some connection that they can have, right? And I think that, again, the technical side for me is it's a technical challenge first. Absolutely. Right? I'm always trying to think of.
That's a really amazing description of the process in terms of taking us through how you would make a piece.
Right.
I'm going to turn to all of you for questions in a minute. So cogitations and questions, both those bubble up. But I really want to know too how your sculpture work, how it led you to this very impressive catalog of film experience that you've had. How did that happen? Was it a connection to it? How did you make this?
One of the things I use the term attrition, that you just got to outlive the other people, man. You know, when everybody else is sort of giving up and they're like, oh, I didn't make it famous. And I'm like, okay, I'm okay. I'll just keep doing this. And so the people that I work with in the bigger films in Toronto, we're all getting a little bit older now too, which is interesting because I would have, you know, given my left leg to work on some feature films when I was a teenager, but it didn't happen until I was into my 20s, early 20s, 30s, that I got some film jobs. But because I worked on them and then they did another show and somebody went, oh, we should give that guy a call. Yeah. He's good, he works hard, and he has a full-time job, so he's not going to compete with us. So that was kind of that really was my in, right? Like they're no problem when I show up, they're like, oh, it's him again. He's slumming it for a week, you know, and I'm like, yep, you know, and I show up to work and they tell me what they need and then I build stuff and then I leave. Right. And it's very satisfying for me. The industry is insane in terms of, you know, anybody who's ever worked in film, it's like huge, grandiose ideas that never get off the ground. You build hundreds of things that never get filmed. So there's a lot of that frustration that when I show up at the shops, I'm always still full of excitement and joy, and they just look at me like, you'll learn. One of these days you'll be jaded like us. But they're doing it full time, and they have to suffer the ups and downs of an industry, whereas I don't.
Right.
And again, going back directly to your question, because I've always made this stuff, when I go to a shop, they don't have to explain anything to me. You know, I think the quick fun story was one of the recent jobs the last couple of years. I showed up at the studio. I said to the boss, what do you need me to make today? And he's like, I need 8 feet of human intestines. And I'm like, okay. I go over to a bin, I grab some copper pipe, I build a wooden frame for it, I grab some clay and some wire, and I start working on it, get some reference, and he comes over about a half hour later, and I'm well into this. And he's just sort of staring at it, and I'm staring at it, and I just kind of looked at him, and I said, how weird is it that you just said, I need 8 feet of human intestines? And I knew exactly how to get to the point where we would be able to make a mold of this to reproduce them in silicone. So, and he just looked at me and said, well, that's why I'm paying you. And I was like, okay, fair enough. And then we have younger people that come in the shop, and if you said that, they'd be like, oh, where do I start? Yeah. Right? Whereas because I've been doing it for so long, and that's one of the things, like my boss, the people that I work for, they know. They're like, I'm going to hire you. You're going to work, you're only going to work 5 days, but they're going to be 15 to 20 hour days. You're going to get the job done. And that's it. You know what I mean? There isn't that second guessing.
Do you have a favorite film project that you've worked on or something that you've done in?
I mean, two of the ones that always come to mind, Land of the Dead, George Romero's Land of the Dead, because George Romero had sort of given up on the zombie genre for years. And then he came back, did this thing in Toronto, and I got on deck. And it was fun. We were just making zombies. It wasn't that expressive or creative, but the environment, because so many people wanted to be on that show because George was back. Yeah. It's like, George is back. So it's an LA crew, and they got all these Canadians, and then there was other people that got word of it that came up from the States to do a day or two. That was a riot. That was a real riot. But 300 was probably the most exciting because of the people that were involved in the show. And that was one of those, I had a friend that I'd worked with. They'd hired every makeup artist they could in Montreal. So they were looking outside. I got a phone call, and it was just basically him saying, or the department head saying, oh, Patrick gave me your name. Are you available? I was like, yeah. And he said, do you suck? And I said, no. He said, excellent. Come on up. We're going to put you up at a really nice suite downtown Montreal. So we stayed with the stuntmen in the same hotel. We got our shuttle bus in the morning. You got a shuttle bus with like 5 effects guys and 5, of the Spartans. All ripped and pumped from the day before, and we're all off to the set. And that was an adventure because they filmed it in an old locomotive factory north of Montreal. So I had no idea at the time. I mean, I've seen an auto plant, and I thought those are huge. a locomotive plant makes an auto plant look like a mom and pop, right? It was the biggest building I've ever seen in my life, you know, and it's got rails on the top for people to walk on, and, you know, huge open expanses, because they filmed, like, they had 3 actual shooting stages in this one giant locomotive factory.
Wow.
So
I had
that
no
was,
idea that was shot in Montreal.
yeah, that was amazing. Like, that was definitely the project that, you know, I measure other projects by. So
Yeah.
when I get a call and I'm like, so suites with rooftop pool? And they're like, no, Super 8.
Intestines.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're going to the Super 8, buddy. You wouldn't want to touch that pool.
That's amazing. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? Okay, I have to get my Phil Donahue.
Get your Phil Donahue.
1 second here, so that people at home can hear you.
My question is about the eyes.
Okay.
There are some specific ones. The second
Just
one.
speaking to that.
Okay, the second one over, the gentleman with the kind of blue, it's almost like a shirt.
Lonnie Jones.
The eyes in that are what drew me right into this whole thing.
Oh, neat. That's really neat.
These, they're very expressive.
So who's that?
Lonnie Jones.
Lonnie Jones, okay.
So, in all of them, I started to look at
Yeah.
all the eyes on them. Are you making eyes? Or you-
I mean, I make eyes for my pieces. A lot of times, when it's a one-of-a-kind piece, it'll have eyes that I've physically made.
And what do you, how do you make
I mean, it's actually, it's simpler than it sounds, but I figured out the right cone to drill into an orb. So if you have a ball and you drill a cone in it, and then you paint inside the cone, so that when you do put a clear liquid on top, you're looking into it. Because an eyeball isn't, it's not a white ball with sort of paint on the outside. And that's where I think, that breaks the difference, right? Is like when you see a ball that you've just painted an eye on the outside, you're like, okay, it can be painted well, but when you have an eye that literally physically you kind of look and you see the light kind of going into this sort of recessed cone, that was the big learning point for me, right? Was like, oh, because when you look at a human eye and you see it from the side, the iris, you can't see the iris, it's sort of see-through, so it's literally just obsessive minutia that you stare at and you try to figure it out, right?
So the one with the like that chores with the kind of moth wings,
Oh, yes.
the eyes in that, like the depth in it just keeps going back and back and back.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's how they made those ones, but yeah, I mean, like some of my smaller pieces, I've painted the eyes and tried to get that illusion. But yeah, physically if you kind of think you're making it from the inside out, right? It's like, yeah, sometimes when, I know with some of your pieces, there's like a skeleton underneath,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, yeah, it's like if I'm going to make a face and put eyelids, I need something under that. Otherwise you're just, you know what I mean? It flattens. So I think, yeah, when you say that in terms of with the eyes, the really well-made ones, yeah, there's no doubt about it. Like they reflect light, they capture light.
So basically you paint more
Yeah.
and then pour clear over top.
Yeah. So you can put like a clear material inside this piece. The word isthmus is, when a liquid gets that little bubble on top, and that's how, that's how I used to make eyes. But I mean, now, you can buy buttons that have that look and you can recess them and so on. But yeah, it's really just, like I said, it's like veins are on the sclera, they're in the sclera, the white of the eye. So it's just that weird thing that once you study it, you're like, okay, you take that layer off. And then if you're trying to build it, you're like, okay, how do I make this without genetics? Yeah, you're welcome.
My answer would have been this big. My answer would have been this big.
Here's something that's open to all of you. One thing I noticed when walking around, looking at all of them, they all externally a little macabre, but really there's something very moving, or some real pathos to maybe most of them. Is that, when you create these dolls, is that part of what you're after, that kind of humanity?
I think that for me it is, they come to life. How would you describe?
I don't know, because I'm similar to you with how I work, where I start with the eyes and I just kind of start forming something until something comes out. And sometimes I don't even know the story I'm trying to tell until I'm telling
This
it.
is so true, you know, so
I
true.
used to use the example of like, there's enough Ann Gettys to kill a whole planet. You know what I mean? There's enough pretty, beautiful, puppies and babies.
Yeah.
There's enough of that. And I don't really get that same reaction, but certainly when I see something, a misfit, something that's odd, it gets it has a warmer spot in my heart,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I definitely think, again, when when you go back to punk and goth and,
Yeah.
those kids, it's like, yeah, I mean, we were those kids who really didn't have, I can honestly, you can probably look at everybody's work and you're not going to find too many that were the popular kid in high school.
Actually, the funny thing that I remembered with a lot of the doll makers that we worked with, most of them said they had a phobia of dolls, and I also had a phobia of dolls.
I did not.
That's interesting.
My
I had
sister,
no interest in them at all as a child.
my sister had this 3-foot one, and my parents kept it in the garage. And every time they were like, "Can you go to the freezer and get something?" I'm like, "No, because it's going to eat me, or its eyes are going to open when I walk past, or it's going to poke me." And even as a teenager, it freaked me out to walk past this thing. So I thought that was really interesting that people who were making these unconventional dolls
Right.
had this fear of them to begin with.
It's like an exercise, I guess, right? You're like exercising your own demons by being like,
Yeah.
okay, if I make it, then I know it's
Then
not
I
going to come
know it's not evil,
Right? This
yeah.
one I'm safe from this one because it's like I brought you into this world, I can take you out. Right?
Yeah, I never thought about it. That's good.
I share Sarah's thought. I mean, 'cause there's some dolls some people post a picture of some doll they see
Yeah.
at like a strange sale, and I'll just kind of go, so no, I don't get that off of anything I'm seeing here.
No.
Like,
There's a
nothing
sweetness in them.
Quite moving.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at that one right over there, the woman in the pink.
Yes.
With that doll. It's, it's very, there's a lot of pathos to that. And
Yeah.
I can't even tell you why.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
So when's next for Dollirium?
Ooh. Well, again,
What's
like
next for Dollirium?
Dollirium was birthed out of life circumstances. It was also closed due to life circumstances, and has a very deep spot in my heart and in my head. So she is still in my head on the shelf, and there has been some talk over the last 10 years of when will this happen again. It will. We just don't know when. But there's some very serious conversations between Sarah and Anthony and myself about how and when. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Thrill after 10 years to see the work animating the walls.
They absolutely, I closed the gallery, took the dolls off the wall, put them in boxes, and they have been in my personal care and storage for 10 years, carefully, knowing that someday something was going to happen with these dolls. And that was when Sarah offered me this opportunity.
You got 2 weeks to get your shit.
And Sandra, yeah, literally 2 weeks, a spot open. Sandra has offered us this spot. I was like, let's do it. There wasn't really a question on there whether we would or not. It was just like, let's get this done. Literally.
Bring the dolls to the gallery today.
Bring the dolls to the gallery today. So I literally took them out of storage and marched them down the street.
Yeah.
And here we are. So it has definitely inspired all of us to look at this much needed gallery again.
And we were exposed to
So-
a new audience too. Like there's a lot of people that had no idea that Dollirium was around 10 years ago. They weren't. So there was quite a lot
Yeah.
of people that were approaching us and being like, where,
What?
where did all this come from? And we're like, okay, trying to explain it to them. But that excitement was, we're like, okay, how do we, of course we want to keep it going. We want to, get that new group, that new blood,
Yeah.
It's, again, that's what inspires me when I see a show. It's like, oh, I never thought of that. That's really cool.
Any other questions? Well, the resurrection, I hope there is many afterlives for
Yeah.
Dollirium and future afterlives that will come. If you're a young artist who has an interest in this kind of work, how do they become part of the community that forged all of you? Is there entry points nowadays?
I mean,
for,
I've always been open to, and Sarah's wonderful where she's like, okay, this person, they want to meet you. And then I'm like, okay. And then, the FAMs, the
Yeah.
FAM brothers, right? It's like, yep, these two young men and they build models and they make their own figures as well. And they're
Tony's coming to Sculpting Jam. We just don't know when we're doing
excellent.
it yet.
Yeah, and it was that thing where it was like, okay, so I've always been very open to be like, okay, all visual FX on Instagram, send me a message, send me questions. If you have questions, I will answer them. I don't, the term gatekeeper I've only recently begun to hear, and then it was interesting because I realized I'm not one. And that was the big thing, right? Was realizing that it's like, no, I kind of want other people to do, like Sarah said, then you get a crew. You're like, this
Yeah.
is awesome. Now I have people I can hire.
Now we can make movies.
So it was that idea of always being open to that and never sort of feeling like, if it wasn't for the people that mentored me as a kid, that invited me to their studio to show me, Ray Harryhausen stop motion animation books and stuff, I never would have known that there was people who did this. If I, hadn't met Stefan and he invited us to his studio, I never would have known that. So having anybody who's willing to be like, what do you need to know? If I ever got to the point where somebody surpassed me, then I'd be like, wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Not, oh no, the worst thing that could ever happen. I think hopefully they're gracious, but that's all you can hope for. But the reality is like, again, I would joke about it with tattoo artists who would complain about clients and be like, if it wasn't for your clients, you would just be a lonely person tattooing your own thighs in your basement. And that's only going to go so far. So you better like sharing,
Yeah.
because you need these people and not just, from the job end, but just that support and that inspiration that you get by, every time I get to work in a film in Toronto and I show up and there's a bunch of young people there and the boss puts me in a nice little prime spot and I get to sculpt something and they're like, who the hell is this guy? And I'm like, what are you working on? They're like, oh, and I'm learning. I get, I kind of, I was discussing it earlier about, volunteering at Rogers and I was like, it was free. I learned more in a year of volunteering at Rogers than I would have if I spent money and went to Fanshawe. And I'm like, do people not know that? It's kind of like this really well-kept secret. It's like if you volunteer, they let you do stuff. And the more you do, the more you learn, you make connections. Yeah. And that's what we want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
and I love Sarah's point too, that when you're run out of Kincardine, you're going to find your people. It's
Yeah.
Hey, I like the sunsets and like to go back to once in a while, but I left London for a year and a half and came running back for the community here. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a great
Forge.
community.
You do
Yeah.
so much.
a
I
great
would like to thank everybody for coming, everybody who joined us online. Thank you so much. Thanks to TAP for hosting us tonight and for putting together and offering space for a show like this. And thanks so much for the generosity of your responses, your time, your artistic practice, and what you do for the community, all three of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't mean this. Wow.
We're standing.